what are the biggest barriers to preventing better data transparency and also the general accuracy within the ecosystem?
One of the biggest gaps that we've solved was we worked with a partner called TruthSet. One of the things they found with third-party data providers, specifically looking to reach U.S. Hispanics, is that there is close to a 40% accuracy in who they are determining is somebody of Spanish language dominance or of Spanish language ethnicity. I think that becomes extremely problematic when you think about a brand or an advertiser who has the right intent to reach this growing population within the US in language, in culture, but in actuality, when they apply the tactics and the targeting on top of it, they're only reaching 40% of their target audience, right?
Welcome to the PubWay podcast. Each episode will showcase a conversation with a leader from the publishing world. If you're working at a publisher, a DSP or SSP, or you're just curious about the media industry and want to sit down and pick the brains of the experts from within the publishing space, then this is the show for you. Hello, and welcome to the PubWay podcast. My name is Tina Yanakino.
And I'm Mike Villalobos. And in today's episode, I'm extremely excited for two reasons. One, we're actually going to be diving into programmatic advertising around, or more importantly, data and CTV, but also challenges around measurement and the future of monetization. And I'd be remiss to say that I'm not excited for this. I'm very excited for this because of some personal attachment to Televisa. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tina.
And joining us today is Brian Lin, the Senior Vice President of Product Management and Advertising at TelevisaUnivision. Welcome, Brian. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the show today. Super excited to jump in and have a great conversation with you guys.
Absolutely. And before we dive into all the exciting topics, it'd be great for you to just give a little context on your current role, your career history, just for our audience.
Sure. So, as you said, Senior Vice President of Product Management for ad sales at TelevisaUnivision. My team works on all things around advanced advertising. So anything that's not a standard traditional 30-second linear spot, we work on things like data-driven linear, advanced measurement and alternative currency to streaming, programmatic and advanced ad units as well. So interactive new ways of thinking about how we implement streaming capabilities on CTV.
That's amazing. I think just to start the conversation off, would be super helpful to start off with the importance around data quality. I think there's been a really big challenge challenge and also growing topic of conversation around how to progress what's been a big topic that hasn't really moved too much in the last probably 5 years. What are the biggest barriers to preventing better data transparency and also its general accuracy within the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting topic. One in which I've been in this industry for quite some time now, across legacy publishers like Paramount to Cablevision on the MVPD side, and always sort of involved in things like addressable television and DDL. Back in those times, I never really data quality didn't necessarily really strike me as something that was super important for our industry. But as I got to TelevisaUnivision and started to look at the landscape of, available data as it was to determine to reach U.S. Hispanics, I started to see a huge gap, right? And one of the biggest gaps that we've solved was we worked with a partner called TruthSet. They're sort of a data They're a group of data gurus really looking at examining data quality across our ecosystem. And one of the things they found with third-party data providers, specifically looking to reach U.S. Hispanics, is that there is close to a 40% accuracy in who they are determining is somebody of Spanish language dominance or of Spanish language ethnicity. And I think that becomes extremely problematic when you think about a brand or an advertiser who has the right intent to reach this growing population within the US in language, in culture, right? But in actuality, when they apply the tactics and the targeting on top of it, they're only reaching 40% of their target audience, right? So that's sort of by negligence, really, giving them, an arm tied behind their back to try to do what they're trying to achieve. And so, data quality really becomes something that over the last couple of years at TU, we've been really focused on in evangelizing. We built our own household graph that aggregates all of the different touch points from live events on the local side of things to our audio and podcast products, as well as linear and streaming together. And we reach nearly 95% of total U.S. Hispanics. And so that's been something that, has been a game changer for us. And, it's been something that we've been working really hard to both educate and also give, our agency partners and our brand partners access so that they can garner those insights, right? Donna Speciale, who's our president of ad sales, always says that, of the top 300, 400 companies in the US, there's only like 250 of those companies actually working with TelevisaUnivision to reach US Hispanics, right? And so it's not that the remaining don't have necessarily a strategy, but I think it's a bit of both, right? I think this touches upon the data quality. They may have tried it their way, but, they're like, well, I don't see the results. And frankly, I think, it's the data quality side of things that, drives, that is inhibiting them from seeing the results.
Yeah, and I think obviously the cookieless future has been a huge topic, especially relating to open web. CTV is inherently cookieless. So when you think about how that also ties in first-party data, first-party data or third-party doesn't matter, as long as there's a party going on from our marketer's perspective. But I think as we're shifting towards more of that first-party use, looking at subscriber data, the old school Nielsen top box aggregation of household members, there's kind of a full circle moment happening with marrying all this data. So I guess my question for you would be, how could publishers and advertisers better leverage that sort of data to drive the outcomes they're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, most companies across, the publisher landscape, as well as the brand and the agency landscape, have really focused on their, first party or third party data strategy, right? So, big agencies like Omnicom have their platform Omni and Epsilon, Axiom, et cetera. And then on the brand side, as they went through their own digital transformation, you have like brands like T-Mobile and P&G and others who's like super leaned in, have data scientists, on their team and are building cohorts, and they have a really good understanding of what's happening within their ecosystems, right? And respectively on the publisher side, I think the same thing's happening too, right? So, I just described earlier, how we've built our own household graph and started to go to market with it. The same thing's happening at Paramount, same thing's happening at NBC Universal and Disney, et cetera. And where I think the rubber meets the road here is today, we sort of use these data exchanges or intermediaries to join those data sets, right? To be able to find commonality around that. And those typically are done through things like pseudo identifiers so that we, don't step on any privacy laws and things like that. But there's signal loss through there, right? Like the biggest question everybody asks, when we do a data match with somebody is like, well, what's the match rate, right? And so that's always the catch-22 is like, well, you don't want the match rate to go super high, but then you give up some of the quality in order to do so. And then if you don't have a good match rate because you want the quality to be extremely high, and then so the result is you don't have a great match rate there. Over the last couple of years, there's been some pretty interesting technology. Certainly clean rooms are a big part of the conversation these days because it's technology that lets us, the publisher with their first party data and the brand with theirs, be able to combine it together, assuming we have common identifiers, so able to combine it together and not have the fear that somebody's going to take that data out and do something nefarious with it or to take that data for their own sort of strategy in the future. And so I think that's one thing that I've been personally super excited about because it starts to unlock and open the doors more for people to rely on their first party data and be able to frankly see that ROI, because measurement ultimately comes down to the ability to look at those granularities, which in the past we haven't necessarily been able to. And now as television's become this, still the big device in the room, but it's a big iPhone in your room, right? It sends data back to the mothership at the publisher land, and then the brand who's advertising on that content, right, gets data immediately, right? That's the beauty of programmatic. You get the feedback instantly.
That's so true. And I think part of data is also looking at the stats around that, going into the conversation and the guardrails that are part of it. I bring that up mainly because one thing is lost, I think, upon a lot of people in the multicultural space is 90% of all U.S. Hispanics only speak Spanish. What that means, I double click on that is because I myself am first generation and spoke Spanish at home the entire time, but all my friends spoke English, right? So it's really interesting to look at co-viewing as part of that conversation, because even though I read, write majority of my day in English, when I went home, it was always going to be in Spanish, and that co-viewing and that occurrence is very rare because it has to be a very niche kind of and scalable audience that you're gonna approach. So it's tough to flirt that balance. And I think when you inherently have that as a platform like Televisa, it's a game changer, right? Because you're able to reach second, third generation people. That in mind, though, would love to hear more along the lines of like just general measurement. I think speculation is healthy, especially in our industry, given some of there's the bad actors in the space. I guess how can the industry establish better benchmarks that are clear to align with expectations of the outcome, right? Whether it be if a campaign runs, did we hit the on target percentage? Because we're looking to hit U.S. Hispanics and maybe folks that don't speak English or Spanish but are part of that household. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on aligning benchmarks and generally measurement across CTV.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. Certainly the first one, you touched upon co-viewing, right? I think co-viewing is in my opinion, still one of the biggest opportunities out in the CTV space, right? So for most, brands and advertisers that's been operating in sort of the programmatic, ecosystem, co-viewing really wasn't part of that conversation, right? There has been some of it, but generally speaking, if you're buying, programmatically, display inventory, mobile inventory, online video, CTV, you're counting the impressions that you're delivering to those unique devices, right? And for the most part, if it's to a desktop, laptop, or to a mobile device, those are individual devices that people are able to be able to look at, and the respective CPMs, garner that. But CTV, while it's sort of been something that's been changing over the last couple of years, came to bear, we sort of very quickly was like, okay, well, let's get everything connected so that everything can get monetized through programmatic, which, from an operational standpoint, it makes total sense, right? But the opportunity there is like, to your point, around multi-generational families watching television together, you have more than one person sitting in front of the TV screen at dinner time often, right? And so that phenomena still exists. I think on average, general market is like 1.5 to 1.7 is your co-viewing factor, meaning there's about on average 1.5 to 1.7 people sitting in front of the screen, as measured by a traditional panel measurement provider like Nielsen. And then for general U.S. Hispanics on average, you have like 2.6 to 3, right? So that phenomenon is still growing. And if you think about it, right, that is like 3 impressions you're generating on that household every time you deliver a CTV ad, right? And you take that and you consider the effective CPM you're really paying. Take the CPM that you're paying, is whether it's $30 or $15, not divided by 3, right? And that's what you're actually paying. So it's extremely powerful. And I think that, again, in my opinion, there's still a huge opportunity there as, from a value standpoint. I think that's part of the reason why CTV has been so hot as of late.
Actually, random question. You mentioned you guys have audio as well. Are you guys bridging that gap between audio and TV, or is it kind of a separate solution? I just my own notification at this point because I'm really curious about it.
Yeah. So we have a number of local broadcast station groups, right? So call it like over the air radio, and then we also have a couple. Euphoria is our streaming audio application app that you can download, and so that gets tied in with a number of our live events. That we have our Euphoria concert that happens from time to time, and then all of the music and the podcasts streamed there.
Amazing.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, as
CTV is continuing to shift more to like a programmatic first model, that obviously presents a lot of opportunities and challengers for both publishers and advertisers. I guess how do you feel this evolution is kind of happening, whether to Univision specifically or kind of in the greater ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing, right? We talked a bit about measurement earlier. I think the biggest benefit is that, legacy media, mediums, if you will, call it radio or television, has now, evolved into a bi-directional device, right? I joked earlier about it being like a big iPhone. These devices now send signal back. And, whereas they didn't before, even 30 years ago, right? Like 10, 20, 15 years ago, smart TVs, they started to come out and be more pervasive. It's not something that, this has only just happened in our recent generations. And what opportunity that sort of entails is that we have more data to be able to connect to in terms of measurement opportunities. So you think like, there's been a big boom in sort of the retail media area, right? Similarly, all of these companies like your Walmarts and your Amazons and your Targets are building their, big outcome media database and then using it as a way to be able to drive more brand marketing dollars to be spent on them. Because why? Because they can measure the outcomes of what's happening and what's flying off the shelf, right? And you can't do that with precise measurement when, television was still measured using, broad statistics and like extrapolation, right? You could only kind of sort of measure it in aggregate, back when it was just linear. You can say, okay, well, I served this campaign last quarter, and then 45 days, 30 days later, I saw this spike in sales. So I'm assuming those things are the same, like, that one caused the other and it's correlated with each other. It's not an exact science, but you can certainly, have some level of correlation there. But now we move into a world where you have one-to-one connection with these identifiers. You're able to see how many hops this single, device went through. And you're able to understand that it took on average like 15 exposures to sell a BMW or something to that extent.
Yeah, there's also the QR codes too now, and secondary screens as a more direct or impactful call to action.
But do QR codes actually help though? I'm a little bit. I'm cynical on that. I'm not gonna lie.
I've seen conflicting evidence.
Yeah. I mean, let's not forget that retail media networks have been around for 3 years, 4 years, maybe, in earnest, right? Yeah. I'm sure they've had some version of it. Do you think there's a version that evolves to become non-endemic into CTV environments where it's Televisa partnering up with Goya, right? Or whatever, maybe, and Goya is partnering with Kroger to sell more Goya. I think there's an ecosystem that can happen where it's not just happening in the big box stores, but also expanding into CTV, where it's like it feels very endemic in terms of the audience that's matched up with the brand being sold on the shelf. Do you see that happening in the next 3 to 5 years, or is that too far fetched?
No, I think you're spot on. We've been having active conversations with a number of, e-commerce and, and retail media networks, or commerce media networks, if you will. Amazon being one of the latest ones that we've announced, where we're connected to their clean room, and we can access Amazon segmentation and information about Amazon, people who are on the Amazon app, if you will, and that allows us to then sell this further out to brand advertisers that are working with us, P&G and others who can benefit off of this.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that leads into kind of more of the broader conversational categorization, segmentation. Do you think that if we improve the metadata being passed through, and we actually categorize the inventory a little bit more, I think, intentfully, because I think right now we operate a little bit in the clouds when it comes to more CTV or broader branding approaches, bring more in detail. So like categorizing with more nuance, whether it be the IAB taxonomy, content taxonomy, or CTV just generally speaking by itself. Would that help expose better parameters for brands to buy more and more effectively, or is that too much of a kind of refinement that will hinder scale?
Yeah, it's kind of like a log level data argument too. Some publishers keep it super close to the chest, as they should. It's their first party data, it's their IP. Others seem more willing to play ball and share additional insights to help strengthen the kind of the reach of their audience.
Totally. Yeah, lots of thoughts there,
Yeah,
right?
I'm sure. You sit right in the middle, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, so on the log level data side, I sit on the side of let's share as much as possible with the advertiser, because the way I look at it is it's a receipt of what you bought, right? Now, if you're asking me for all of my app like log data of other advertisers, what they bought, I can't give you receipts of like what other people bought. But certainly if you bought it, we should be able to tell you where you bought it, what content it was served on, and you should be able to, if the brand was working on effectiveness reports and ROAS, they should be able to calculate it off of that. And it's a, that closed loop is what continues, advertisers to come back and spend with us, right? So I'm totally on board with being as, liberal as possible in terms of, data sharing and making sure that, advertisers have what they need in order to prove effectiveness. On the flip side of metadata and, content, I think it's really interesting where we are. I still say like we're, even though CTV is almost at the point in which it's getting close to like 50% of like total video consumption at some of these legacy publishers that have both, traditional linear and like cable and satellite to, now their own streaming apps. It's getting pretty close, right? And, historically, if you look at sort of how, because I've operated on both sides, traditional linear has been sold. You have sort of a rate card of like network, day parts, selling titles, if you will, right? And the selling title is really just like another sort of like it's another way of like a PMP where, there is like specific content that's put in there. Right. And the networks in itself almost have their own effective genres, right? Like you think, back when I was at Viacom, Paramount, Comedy Central generally is going to be that sort of comedic genre, right? MTV, BT, et cetera, has already been sort of divided, and children be like Nickelodeon, right? So it's already been kind of divided from a content standpoint. Now we move towards sort of the CTV world. Many of the publishers today don't necessarily have that much, like their products divided up by content and time and things like that. Certainly on the programmatic side, when it gets to an SSP or to somebody that's helping monetize our inventory from a programmatic means, those content fields are often left empty, right? Because I think in the past has been an inherent fear that there'll be cherry picking that happens, with that inventory if it's been, if that content, metadata tag has been put out. But I think, frankly, that whether we like it or not, I think it's going to get there, right? Because to your point, not all content is the same, right? VIX has, soccer, it's got novellas, it's got news, it's got sort of everything, in there, and it's got talk shows, so reality. So you need to give the buyer a better understanding of what content they're going to air on. Otherwise, how do you ensure brand safety and all of the other good things?
I guess tangential question. So it seems like publishers or broadcasters are more averse to obviously targeting against certain content shows. On the flip side of that, on reporting, if we were able to report, do you think it's more of a tech limitation, or do you feel that maybe it's just a choice they're making that they just don't want to show the content level and they're obfuscating the episode and show content? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can't speak to every publisher out there, but I can say it mostly is, from my understanding, it's mostly not a tech problem, right? Because you consider, as you're building your own streaming application or, white labeling, any sort of, content, CMS system of some sort, the metadata around the content's already there, at least the more generic versions of it, right? And sure, there's a number of like, AI providers today that, tout that they can provide more metadata on our content and, dive deeper into sentiment analysis of what's happening in the content. That might not be available in a CMS system, or a content management system, if you will. But the generic ones around genres that match with like what the IAB guidelines are and things to that extent, they're there, right? They're available.
Absolutely. And I think kind of to shift gears a little bit, we think about the consumer and the viewer, traditional ad formats like pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll, while they were effective, it's definitely a new age right now, especially as we think about secondary screens. Even recently, like watching The White Lotus, my husband's always like, ooh, what's that t-shirt? Like, I want to buy it. And was like using Google to go into his phone and find like who's the brand selling it. How are you as a publisher kind of rethinking that ad experience? I can obviously speak for us at CTAG, being a contextual company, looking at things like sentiment, and if it's a sad show or they're like blankets or tissues we could advertise, or like it's happiness, or there's different types of advertising around more of that sentiment versus the specific show itself. I guess, how is a publisher like you viewing it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think when you consider the experience of television, CTV today, it generally hasn't been a very good experience. I think we're getting better, and certainly the frequency problem is getting a little bit better, but generally speaking, it's the ad loads are still fairly high, right? One of which, which is why I think these advanced ad capabilities and units are appealing to others, right? So if you take content like football or soccer, if you will, um, generally speaking, it's got less of an ad load on there. So we have to be super creative about how we bookend those natural inclinations or natural breaks that happen, whether it's during a penalty or during some sort of natural break within the drama of the game that's happening. And we partnered with a number of technology providers to provide those ad experiences, right? Whether it's a squeeze back, while the ref is still, discussing something, and then an ad's going to air, or it's an overlay that pops up underneath, right? And so, we found that those have been super effective in terms of, one, still bringing on the branding that the advertiser is looking for, and then also marrying that with the drama that's happening within sporting events, right? I find that that's been something that's been really elegantly implemented in certainly in our ecosystem, and not sort of overbearing and taking over the whole screen and things like that.
Live sports, I think, is really tough to crack,
Yeah.
just because of the nature and dynamism of it. Do you think there'll be any innovation in that area where it's tailored towards a region or towards someone who may have a certain affinity towards a team, whether it be soccer or any other sport? Because Televisa has, loads of the consumption data at that point.
Yeah.
How do you see dynamic live ad insertions playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we've been investing heavily in investigating in this area, both from a, streaming consumption standpoint, also to, live, and also considering things like second screen, right, and gamification, right? So, you mentioned, we joked earlier about QR codes, and it's, it was the behavior, or it was the technology that came out back, when we still had like Blackberries and BBM. And, somehow people didn't really understand how to use them until 2020, like 10 years later, when, all the menus disappeared, and, there's just a QR code, and so it sort of inadvertently trained everybody to be able to use these things. And to our benefit, now these things can show up on screen, right? And you can sort of connect your phone to to the big screen and sort of go along with what's happening. We did this really cool integration with this company ShopSense, where during the Latin Grammys, they were able to, as people were walking down the red carpet, we had this QR code where people were able to scan, and we partnered with Walmart in that case to be able to put out different outfits that, and there was, there was some AI that helped us do that, but, we were able to put out different outfits that people were wearing during the show, or close to what they were wearing during the show. And you can shop the runway effectively, which I think was a really cool thing that, and we actually saw a decent amount of sales go through that.
That's awesome. Look, a trend turn timeless tool, the QR code.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone down here would love to kind of get your thoughts on what is a trend that you're seeing today that our listeners can apply kind of in their strategies, or just keep an eye out for as they build innovation. What's something that maybe it's more social given kind of the climate that we're in today, or something that's going to impact the industry tomorrow? Would love to hear what you're thinking here, because this is right up your wheelhouse.
Yeah. I mean, I already mentioned it already. I think AI is definitely one of those things that's the buzzword that's like
You almost made it the entire podcast without saying AI.
we
For
did.
record.
We almost did.
I'm sorry to break that.
30 minutes.
That's
Sorry.
right. But you did ask me about the trendy questions. So
Oh, for sure.
I think AI certainly, of course, is, people are thinking about the implications of that and the applications of it across our supply chain, right? Everything from, creative to creative optimization, and more dynamic creative to how we, deliver the ads, right, where we want to get to, and then certainly measurement and insights, right? You have bots and agents that are calculating that for you. But I think one thing that hasn't necessarily talked about or made it to the trends, which frankly, I thought that was really cool. A couple months ago, Microsoft announced a new quantum chip that they actually created. And it's a small chip now that could handle processing of a large quantum computer, which used to fit in like warehouses in size. And so I think they actually even had to create a new element, or the result of that created actually a new element in the element table, which was fascinating. But I think that's something that is going to change, right? If we think about sort of how even the programmatic ecosystem works, you have bids and asks and these opportunities that are coming through. During my time at MadHive, as I was the CPO there, we spent a lot of time analyzing and trying to understand the bid stream, and what was coming through, and how do we match with other SSP partners more concertedly. And one thing I understood was that because the data was so large, right, that even the cloud computing partners like Google that we've had, one, the cost would be exorbitantly high if we tried to look at every single opportunity. So we didn't, right? So I think most, programmatic partners today sample at, once every, couple milliseconds, or once every 100 rows, 200 rows, and things to that extent. And so, in my opinion, there's some efficiencies that can be gained with technology that can unlock our ability to process data extremely fast. But I think we're acting at a limitation of where we're at now. So that really excites me that, new elements are being created, and new innovation is happening on the compute side that's going to be able to, that our ecosystem maybe even be able to benefit off of.
Absolutely. Maybe we can have a recap episode a year from now and explore some of these ideas and see if any have surfaced.
Sure.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This has been a lovely conversation, super insightful. Loved having you on. You said welcome back anytime. Like and I are still here.
We can have a whole other 3-hour conversation around quantum computing in and of itself. So
y'all can do that. I'll sit my tea over here.
My ears perked up. I was like, yes, let's say more. But Brian, I echo the same sentiment. Thank you so much for the time, man. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.